900,000 years ago, the human story nearly ended before it began. Today we live on a planet of more than 8 billion, yet there was a moment when our entire future rested on fewer than 1,300 souls. For over 100,000 years, our ancestors teetered on the edge of disappearance, their fires burning faintly against the winds of ice and drought. From that narrow thread of survival, every person alive now descends. The traces of that ancient bottleneck live in us still, in our DNA, in the seam of a fused chromosome, in the fragility and resilience that shape our bodies and our bonds. Scientists read these clues like shadows on stone, piecing together how close humanity came to silence. Some say it was fire that helped us return. Others believe it was cooperation or chance itself. The debates remain, but the mystery is clear. The human story is not one of steady growth, but of near loss and fragile endurance. You are listening to Ancient Fireside, where we tell history as a slow-burning story for rest and reflection. If you wish, you may like and subscribe to stay close to these journeys and leave a note of the place and hour you are listening from, so that our circle may stretch across time zones as once it stretched across valleys and plains. And now, let us step gently into the beginning of this long night of survival, where the human family nearly vanished into the dark. Imagine for a moment the sheer vastness of our world today. 8 billion people moving across continents, lights of cities shining at night like entire galaxies laid out upon the earth, voices tumbling over each other in thousands of languages. Now, slowly, let the mind drift backwards. Imagine peeling away the centuries, then the millennia, until all the cities, farms, and villages dissolve into silence. Keep drifting further, far past the first empires, past the earliest tools of bronze, past even the first sparks of agriculture. Drift all the way to a time when humanity itself was no larger than a whisper on the wind. A time when every ancestor of ours could have stood together in a single clearing. No more than 12 or 1,300 souls gathered around their fires. Just 1,280 people. That is the number geneticists now tell us once carried the weight of all future humanity. This is not a myth, not a campfire legend meant to frighten or comfort. It is something revealed only recently in the year 2023 when scientists developed a new way to peer into the past hidden inside our DNA. They called it FitCoal, a model that traces how rare mutations accumulate, allowing them to reconstruct the rise and fall of ancient populations. And what it revealed was astonishing. About 900,000 years ago, our lineage was struck by a collapse so dramatic it nearly erased us. A drop of more than 98%, shrinking the entire human population down to roughly 1,200 breeding individuals, and holding us there for more than 117,000 years. Imagine it, a pause so long, so silent, that it makes all of written history feel like a brief moment in comparison. Think of the starkness of that reality. Every face you have ever seen, every language you have ever heard, every story that has ever been told comes from that fragile group. Without them, there would be nothing of us today, no history, no art, no memory. We exist because they endured. And here's a thought that may linger with you as you settle into the rhythm of this story. That number, 1,280, is smaller than the crowd at a high school football game. fewer people than you might find in a single concert hall. Imagine them as a lone village tucked away in a corner of the African landscape, cut off from the rest of the world. Beyond the glow of their fire, silence stretched for miles and miles. A person could have walked for days and never seen another human being. Our species was once no more numerous than a scattering of footprints in the sand, fading quickly beneath wind and rain. Scientists caution us that such numbers are estimates, drawn from probabilities in the code of our genes. Perhaps the bottleneck held more than 1,000, perhaps closer to 2,000, perhaps even fewer than that. Perhaps it began a little earlier, or ended a little later. The precise edges are blurred, as though we are looking through fog across a valley. But the signal is clear. Humanity passed through the narrowest of gates. Whether the number was 1,280, or a bit more, or a bit less, the lesson is the same. We came closer to extinction than we ever knew. Close your eyes and picture it. Picture a cluster of fires inside a ring of caves, the smoke curling into a sky dark with unfamiliar constellations. Picture the sound of a few dozen voices, no more than the size of a family reunion, whispering stories that would vanish with the night. Picture the wind moving over the land, carrying with it the smell of dust and ash. Those people are not strangers. They are our grandparents, multiplied by time. We carry their blood in our veins, their resilience in our bones, their choices written in the silent letters of our DNA. And think of the length of that night, 117,000 years of clinging to survival, not just one generation of hardship, not just a few unlucky decades, but thousands upon thousands of nights when fire had to be protected from rain and wind, when infants had to be held close so they would not freeze, when hunger gnawed at the edge of thought. 100,000 years of holding on, breath by fragile breath against the pull of extinction. Imagine the patience it took, the quiet determination. It is almost hypnotic to picture. A species balanced on the edge, refusing to let go of the thread that would eventually weave us all. If you let your breathing slow, if you listen in the soft spaces between words, you might almost hear it. The echo of footsteps in the dark, the rustle of dry grass beneath hands gathering fuel for a fire, the faint laughter of children, quickly hushed so as not to draw predators from the night. All of this happened, not in the pages of myth, but in the silence of deep time. And all of it is part of you. And so, as we begin this journey together, let me offer something gentle. If this kind of story brings you comfort, if it helps you drift into the deep and quiet waters of sleep, you might leave a small sign of your presence, perhaps a word, perhaps even your time zone, like setting down your own ember among the many glowing dots of night. A way of saying, I am here, I am listening, and I too am part of this long survival. Hold the image of those 1,280 people a little longer. See them gathered under the stars, a cluster of warmth in a cold and empty world. Their breath rises in white clouds. Their eyes reflect the light of flames. Around them stretches silence, but within the circle of firelight is something indestructible. The thread of humanity, held by calloused hands, carried forward through 100,000 years of waiting. From billions today, back to scarcely 1,000 then, from the roar of modern life to the whisper of embers and stone, this is where the story begins. A fragile ember glowing in the dark. And from here, the path leads into the question, how did scientists find this hidden passage in our past? And what secrets do our own genes still hold? Our DNA is not just a blueprint for building bodies. It is also a kind of diary, a manuscript written in microscopic script, passed down without pause for hundreds of thousands of years. Every time a cell divides, every time a child is born, letters of this diary are copied, sometimes with small mistakes, tiny spelling changes known as mutations. Most of them are harmless, just little shifts in the text, but together, across generations, these changes create a pattern. And from that pattern, scientists can read not just who we are, but where we came from and how many of us once lived. If you imagine your genome as a massive book, billions of letters long, then scattered throughout that book are faint marks, scribbles in the margins, fingerprints left by history itself. When researchers looked closely, they found that humans carry unusually little diversity compared with our closest relatives, the chimpanzees and the gorillas. In a group of chimpanzees today, you will find more genetic variety than you do across the entire human species. That odd scarcity of variation was the first clue, like a note slipped between pages, hinting that something dramatic had happened in our past. In 2023, with the help of a new mathematical tool called FitCole, the mystery became clearer. FitCole works a little like a forensic artist reconstructing a face from a skull, but instead of bone, it uses the shape of mutations scattered in our DNA. It looks at how often rare changes appear and at what frequencies. From those patterns, it infers how large the human population must have been at different times. The results showed a steep cliff in population size about 900,000 years ago, one that lasted until roughly 813,000 years ago. The human lineage, once widespread, had been squeezed to a razor-thin thread. You can picture it this way. Imagine standing in front of a library where the shelves have been mostly emptied. The books are gone, the stories lost, except for a small handful of volumes. That is what happened to our genetic library. Whole chapters of diversity, entire shelves of variation, were erased during that long narrowing. What remains in us today is only a fraction of the stories once written. It is almost eerie to think that our genomes carry this silence. When scientists plot the diversity of human genes against time, there is a dip, a valley carved deep into the curve, like a canyon where a river once flowed. That canyon is the Bottleneck. And though we cannot see the people who lived then, their shadow is burned into us like a watermark in paper. Here's something a little playful, almost quirky, that makes this science feel more human. Imagine that every mutation in your DNA is a kind of footnote. In one person it may say, "Once there was drought." In another it may whisper, "Once there was fire." These are not literal words, of course, but metaphors for the traces left behind. Scientists reading our genomes are like storytellers piecing together a manuscript where whole pages are missing. They are searching for the rhythm of the tale by listening to faint echoes of footsteps. When they found that we had fewer footnotes than expected, they realized many voices had been lost. Only a small group had continued the story, copying the book forward, word by word, into the present. Yet there is still debate here. Models depend on assumptions. How often mutations arise, how long a generation lasts, how populations mix or separate. A small shift in those numbers can nudge the timeline forward or back. Some argue the bottleneck may have started earlier or ended later, or that the population might have been a little larger or a little smaller. We are not peering through a clear window but through frosted glass. The outlines are sharp enough to show us that a collapse happened, but the details blur when we try to count exact numbers. Was it exactly 1,280 people? Perhaps, or perhaps a bit more. Was it 117,000 years of struggle? That too might flex by thousands of years. But no matter the exact figure, the truth is inescapable. Humanity once hovered on the edge of disappearance. Take a slow breath and imagine what that edge felt like. If you were one of those people, you would not have known you carried the fate of the species in your hands. You would have known only hunger, the crack of dry grass underfoot, the warmth of fire against a bitter wind. You would have held your child close and whispered stories into the night, just as people do today. And somehow, across 10,000 generations, those whispers reached us. There is a kind of quiet poetry in the idea that our very bodies are evidence. The lines on your hand, the color of your eyes, the way your hair curls or does not, all of it is downstream of the choices those ancestors made. But even deeper than that, buried inside the coils of your chromosomes, is the record of the bottleneck. You do not need to look at fossils or ruins. You carry the proof of survival in the cells of your blood and skin. When I first picture this, I see it as a fire smoldering in a cave. The flames may die down, the wood may be scarce, but as long as there is one coal glowing red, life continues. That is what our genome tells us, that even when the fire was almost gone, someone kept the ember alive. They shielded it with their hands, they carried it carefully from night to night. And eventually, that ember grew again into the bonfire of humanity that now lights the planet. The next time you glance in the mirror, remember, you are not just looking at yourself. You are looking at the latest chapter in a manuscript that was nearly lost. A manuscript carried by fewer people than would fit in a single town square. A manuscript that endured droughts, storms, and cold. And somehow, impossibly, it reached you. And so our story pauses here, in the recognition that our DNA is more than code. It is testimony. It is memory. It is the only voice that speaks across 900,000 years. And from that voice rises the next question. What force in the natural world could have pushed us so far to the brink? What storm, what shifting climate could have thinned humanity to a handful of survivors? Science often moves slowly, step by careful step, like a lantern moving forward in the dark. For decades, geneticists knew something was unusual about human diversity. Compared with our primate cousins, we were too uniform, too similar. A mystery hovered. Had our species gone through some kind of hidden catastrophe? Fossil records gave hints, but the stones were silent. What was missing was a way to read the deep history hidden not in rocks, but in the living code of our cells. In 2023, that lantern of understanding grew brighter with the development of a tool called fit coal. The name sounds technical, but the idea behind it is almost poetic. Fit coal, short for fast infinitesimal time coalescent, works by looking at the rarest mutations scattered in our DNA. These mutations are like sparks drifting away from a fire. By counting how many sparks appear, how often, and how widely they are shared among people today, scientists can reconstruct the size of ancestral populations across time. If there are too few sparks, it means the fire once burned small. If there are many, it means the fire was larger. When researchers applied fit coal to the genomes of more than 3,000 people from around the world, the result was startling. The program revealed a sudden collapse in human population size, roughly 900,000 years ago. The drop was not brief. It was not a single season of scarcity, nor a handful of unlucky generations. The collapse endured for over 100,000 years, leaving behind a scar in the shape of our DNA. That scar is the reason all living humans today are more genetically similar to each other than most chimpanzees are to their neighbors in the forest. To picture how this works, imagine a coastline with waves washing up over sand. Each wave leaves patterns, ripples, shells, bits of seaweed. Over time, those patterns accumulate into a record of tides. In the same way, mutations accumulate into a record of population history. When the population is large, the waves are strong, scattering shells across a wide beach. When the population is small, the waves grow weak, leaving only narrow traces. Fit coal reads those traces like a beachcomber at dawn, piecing together a story from scattered shells. There is something almost quirky, even playful, in this process. The scientists are, in a sense, counting mistakes. Each mutation is an error in copying, like a typo in a book. But by reading those typos, they reconstruct the story of survival. It is as if a scribe once lost nearly all his ink and wrote only in faint, cramped letters for 1,000 pages, before finally dipping his pen again. You can tell by the look of the script when the ink was running out, and you can tell in our DNA when humanity itself was running low. Still, even the best tools have their limits, and this is where the debate comes in. Fit coal makes assumptions about mutation rates, how often they happen, and about generation times, how many years pass between one birth and the next. If mutation rates were slightly faster, the bottleneck might have started earlier. If they were slower, the dates might shift later. Some scientists wonder whether the collapse could have been partly an artifact of how the model treats population splits and reunions. Perhaps small groups were scattered and then rejoined, creating the illusion of one severe collapse rather than a patchwork of smaller ones. Others suggest that DNA from archaic lineages not sampled today could have been lost entirely, leaving the picture incomplete. This is the nature of science. No discovery is a final word, but a conversation. Fit coal has revealed a shape in the fog, a deep valley where our numbers once dwindled. But exactly how steep that valley was, or how wide, remains a subject of careful debate. What matters, though, is that the valley is there. Even with uncertainty, the evidence converges. Humanity was once in peril. Think about the strangeness of this. Fossils from that time are rare. Archaeological sites are sparse. If we relied only on stones and bones, we might never have known this collapse occurred. Yet within us, the record has been waiting all along, hidden in plain sight. Your blood, your skin, your bones, all of them carry this testimony. Without ever digging in the dirt, without ever finding a cave site, scientists could still uncover a catastrophe that nearly erased us. That is the power of genetic history. It turns every living person into a museum of the past. When you sit quietly and let that sink in, the effect is calming and humbling. We are not separate from those ancient lives. We are their continuation. Imagine the people who lived during the bottleneck, unaware that their struggle would one day be written in the bodies of their distant descendants. They would not have known about DNA or about models with technical names. They would have known only hunger and survival. Yet through them, through the children they managed to raise, the story is still written, still readable. Close your eyes and hear the rhythm of it. Scientists counting mutations like beads, sliding them along a string to mark generations. The numbers are abstract, but the reality is physical. Every bead is a life, every string a family line. For more than 100,000 years, the string was nearly cut, but somehow it held. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the voices of those researchers in 2023 presenting their findings to the world, the excitement of solving a mystery, the awe of realizing how close we came to vanishing. It is a reminder that history is not only what we dig from the ground, but what we uncover inside ourselves. Our genomes are archives written not in paper or stone, but in the very fabric of life. And as the lantern of understanding grows brighter, it casts light on the next mystery. If fit coal shows us the when and the how much, then what remains is the why. What force in the world reduced humanity to a thread? What storm? What change? What perfect collision of climate and geography drove us to the edge? To answer that, we must step out of the genetic archive and into the living earth of 900,000 years ago, where ice and desert reshaped the stage of life. When you step outside on a winter night, you may feel the air press colder against your skin, see frost sparkle on the ground, hear the crunch of ice under your boots. Now stretch that sensation across not just a season, but across the architecture of the Earth itself. About 900,000 years ago, the planet slipped into a new rhythm, a shift in the drumbeat of the ice ages. For millions of years before, the great glaciers of the world had expanded and retreated every 41,000 years, moving in tune with subtle tilts in the Earth's orbit. It was a familiar pulse. Ice would grow, seas would fall, then the warmth would return, only for the cycle to begin again. But during what scientists call the early Middle Pleistocene transition, the rhythm slowed. The cycle stretched from 41,000 years to 100,000 years, and with that stretching came deeper freezes, larger ice sheets, harsher droughts, and longer winters. Humanity's bottleneck unfolded inside this new and unforgiving cadence. The change may sound abstract, like numbers on a chart, but its consequences were written into every landscape. Imagine the northern half of the globe locked under immense domes of ice, glaciers hundreds of miles thick, pressing the crust of the earth downward with their weight. The seas retreated, water trapped in frozen mountains. Coastlines stretched further outward, leaving behind broad plains of mud and salt. Winds whipped across them, colder and drier than before. Africa, the cradle of humanity, felt the lash of this transition as deserts swelled and rivers dried. What had once been fertile ground cracked open under relentless sun and absent rain. Grassland shrank, forests pulled back, and the animals that early humans depended on moved in desperate migrations or vanished altogether. To imagine the scale, picture the Great Lakes of North America today, then freeze them solid, stack glaciers taller than skyscrapers on top, and stretch them across the horizon. Picture mountain valleys in Europe and Asia filled not with rivers, but with slow, grinding walls of ice that carved new shapes into the land. The sound of such an age was the sound of silence, broken only by the creak and thunder of glaciers moving. This was the backdrop against which humanity nearly disappeared. There is something quirky, even poetic, in how scientists describe this shift. They sometimes call it the 100K world, as if the planet itself switched the tempo of a song. A metronome ticked differently, and the dancers of life, plants, animals, humans, struggled to keep up. For our ancestors, this meant that the harshness of cold and drought no longer lasted tens of thousands of years, but closer to 100,000. Entire lineages of animals rose and fell within a single icy breath of the earth. And in the midst of it all, the tiny human population was forced into ever smaller refuges. But here lies the debated question, one that scientists still puzzle over. What exactly caused this transition? Why did the Earth's cycles change so drastically? The tilting and wobbling of our planet's orbit, known as Milankovitch cycles, had always shaped the rhythm of ice ages. But something shifted in how the system responded. Was it the accumulation of ice reaching a threshold where feedbacks locked in deeper freezes? Was it the slow drawdown of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, trapping the world in colder states? Or was it the grinding of continents and the rearrangement of ocean currents, shifting the climate engine into a harsher gear? The truth remains debated, the details unresolved, like a puzzle with missing pieces. Yet the outcome was undeniable, a world colder, drier, and more unstable than before. For our ancestors, this was not theory, but lived experience. Imagine standing in Africa during one of those long glacial stretches. The air is sharp and dry, carrying dust that stings the eyes. Rivers that once ran wide are reduced to trickles, their beds cracked and sun-bleached. Herds of animals that sustained human life wander in thinning numbers, their migrations lengthening across dangerous ground. Trees grow sparse, and with them vanish fruits, nuts, and shade. The sun blazes by day, yet the nights bite with chill, a cruel marriage of extremes. Survival in such a landscape meant adaptation, and even then, many did not endure. The bottleneck carved its shape here, in the margins of deserts and along shrinking lakes, where small bands of humans clung to what little remained. The image of a perfect storm often appears in descriptions of this time, and it is fitting. Ice locked the north, drought scoured the south, seas withdrew, and storms of dust blew across continents. It was as though the planet conspired to erase the fragile beginnings of humanity. That we endured at all feels improbable, like a candle burning in a hurricane. Pause and hold that candle in your mind. Its flame flickers, bends under the pressure of wind, but it does not go out. Those 1,280 people were that flame. Their survival meant finding the rare places where the storm eased, small refuges where water still flowed, where food could still be gathered, where fire could still be kept alive. Scientists call these places habitat refugia, small islands of life in seas of desolation. Perhaps they were along river valleys that clung to moisture, or in pockets of forest sheltered by mountains. Perhaps they were caves where firelight could echo against walls, shielding families from the worst of the cold. We do not yet know exactly where they were. That uncertainty lingers like mist inviting speculation, reminding us how much of our own past remains hidden. And yet, we can still trace the outlines. The DNA record shows us the bottleneck. The climate record shows us the storm. When we overlay the two, the story emerges. Humanity was squeezed not only by chance, but by the heartbeat of the earth itself, shifting into a new and harsher rhythm. The survivors of that time carried forward not only their genes, but the memory of endurance. When you listen to this, let the sound of your own breath remind you of wind moving across dry plains. Let the coolness of your room remind you of ice pressing down across continents. Feel the distance between your heartbeat and theirs collapse, as if time folds in on itself. They were cold, they were hungry, they were alive, and because they lived, you live. As we leave this section, the earth is locked in its long new cycle, and humanity is trapped inside it. The glaciers expand, the deserts spread, and the fires of our ancestors burn in fragile caves. But something else begins to stir in the shadows of this bottleneck. Something strange and fateful, written in our very chromosomes. To see it, we must step into the world of our DNA and find the seams where the fabric of our species was stitched together in a way unlike any other creature on Earth. Picture the continent of Africa nearly 1 million years ago, under the spell of a harsher Earth. The land that would one day cradle kingdoms and bustling cities was then a shifting map of extremes, painted in browns, yellows, and ochres. Vast stretches that had once been green savannas slowly hardened into dust and stone. Rivers thinned until they broke into disconnected pools. Lakes that once spread wide across the land retreated into salty hollows. The air itself was thick with dryness, carrying dust storms that scoured the land and left the sky tinted with red haze. This was not a brief drought, but an age of aridification, stretching across tens of thousands of years, reshaping Africa into a crucible where only the most resilient forms of life could endure. For the small bands of humans alive then, the transformation was devastating. Imagine waking to find that the grassland outside your shelter has vanished, the herds of antelope gone with it. The fruit trees you once relied on no longer bear food. The sound of trickling streams has been replaced by silence. Day after day, the heat bears down, the sun merciless, while at night the temperature drops and bites like a predator in the dark. Water must be carried long distances, food must be hunted in riskier places, and every journey into the wilderness is shadowed by hunger. The fossil record tells us that around this time, many animal populations declined. Some vanished entirely from the African interior. Early humans faced the same pressures. Most groups disappeared, and only a small fraction endured, likely by clinging to regions where the dryness was not absolute. These rare places are called refugia, habitats where moisture remained, sheltered valleys where vegetation survived, and where human life could gather around precious water holes. We do not know their exact locations. Some scientists point to river systems in East Africa, others to pockets in the south. Perhaps there were caves facing the ocean where coastal breezes softened the heat, or mountain slopes where mist carried a few drops of relief. The truth is hidden beneath millennia of erosion and change. Yet we know they must have existed, because humanity did not vanish. Pause and imagine one such refuge, a small valley, the ground cracked but still holding a spring. A cluster of families gather here, no more than a few dozen people. The fire they keep burns low to conserve wood. Children play quietly, drawing patterns in the dust, their laughter hushed by the urgency of survival. Hunters leave at dawn to follow tracks, sometimes walking for days to find game. Gatherers scrape roots from the hard earth, searching for whatever can be chewed to keep hunger away. Nights are filled with the sounds of wind rattling dry shrubs, but also with whispers around the fire, stories of animals that once filled the plains, prayers that the rains will come again. There is something oddly intimate in imagining these small groups. Our world today is noisy with billions of voices, but theirs was quiet, fragile. Every life counted. A single accident, a single failed hunt, could mean the difference between survival and extinction. They lived balanced on a knife's edge. And yet, against all odds, some of them succeeded. They found ways to endure in landscapes that seemed intent on erasing them. Scientists sometimes call the African aridification of this period a perfect storm. It was not just the cold of the glaciers in the north, but the dryness of the tropics, the loss of forests, and the collapse of ecosystems all at once. Each factor alone might have been survivable. Together they formed a noose around humanity's neck. That our species slipped through that noose is one of the most extraordinary chapters of our history. And yet, there is debate about where this survival actually happened. Did our ancestors cling to East Africa, along the rift valleys where lakes sometimes swelled with meltwater from distant mountains? Did they survive further south, in pockets of vegetation near the Cape, where coastal climates buffered the worst of the drought? Or did they hold on in several places at once, scattered enclaves slowly exchanging genes across time? The question remains open. Each new fossil, each new genetic study, shifts the map slightly, like moving a candle in a darkened room. The outlines appear, but the picture is not yet complete. Think of how this uncertainty feels. We know we are all descended from the survivors, but we do not know the names of their valleys, the shapes of their shelters, or the paths of their migrations. Their footprints were long ago erased by wind and water, and yet, every one of us carries their legacy. It is strange to realize that the lines of your hands, the color of your eyes, the very sound of your voice, might trace back to a child born in one of those hidden refuges, born in a place we may never locate on a map. There is a sensory weight to this part of the story. Smell the dry dust in the air, taste the grit of sand carried by wind, feel the burn of the sun at noon and the chill of nightfall. The environment was not neutral. It was an adversary. It tested every breath, every step. Those who lived through it became the ancestors of us all. Those who did not vanished without trace. And still, within that harshness, there must have been moments of tenderness. Imagine a mother humming softly to her child, rocking them to sleep beside the embers of a fire. Imagine hunters returning empty-handed, yet still welcomed into the circle because unity meant survival. Imagine laughter erupting from children chasing one another in the dust, even as their parents worried over tomorrow. These moments remind us that humanity is not only defined by struggle, but by connection. That, too, is part of what carried us through. When you sit with this story, you may feel a strange calm. The thought that our species was once so fragile can be unsettling, yet it also reveals a kind of beauty. Out of dust and drought, against impossible odds, a small circle of people kept going. Their fires may have been few, their voices soft, but they were enough. Enough to carry humanity across the desert of time. Enough to deliver us here. As this chapter closes, hold the image of Africa under a red, dusty sky. Imagine those hidden refuges, places of life tucked away in a continent of desolation. The bottleneck was not just numbers and DNA. It was lived experience, thirst, hunger, firelight, and hope. And within those pockets of survival, something remarkable happened. Something written not in sand, but in the deep structure of our bodies. For in that crucible, our chromosomes themselves began to change, leaving a mark unlike any other in the animal kingdom. To understand it, we must turn to the silent record inside our cells and the curious story of how two chromosomes once became one. When a species becomes too small, when its numbers fall below a certain threshold, it is not only the environment that threatens survival, but the mathematics of life itself. Biologists sometimes use the haunting phrase, the extinction vortex, to describe this trap. Picture water swirling down a drain. At first the flow is slow, but once it begins to spiral, the current accelerates, and escape becomes harder with every passing moment. That is what happens to living populations when they shrink too far. The vortex pulls them downward, not through water, but through chance and loss. For the humans who lived 900,000 years ago, trapped inside that long bottleneck, the vortex loomed constantly. With only about 1,280 breeding individuals, the risk of inbreeding was unavoidable. Cousins shared fire, siblings paired with siblings of distant clans, because there were few choices left. Over time, harmful mutations could build up, weakening bodies, shortening lives. A population can only withstand so much of that burden before it falters. There is also the roll of the dice, the sheer randomness of existence. In a group that small, a single storm, a single drought, a single epidemic could have erased everyone. If a lightning strike had taken a valley, or a predator raid had gone wrong, or a bad season of hunting had starved the children, the thread of humanity could have snapped. Larger populations can absorb these blows, but a small one lives at the mercy of chance. That our ancestors endured for more than 100,000 years in such conditions feels almost miraculous. Imagine what it must have felt like to be one of them. Each birth a celebration, each death a heavy shadow. Every child carried the weight of continuity. When you lose one child in a group of thousands, the tribe goes on. When you lose one child in a group of a dozen, the future itself trembles. The fire circle must have glowed with both joy and fear. Joy when new life came, fear that it might not survive. There is something oddly tender in this thought. Picture the small fires inside caves, a handful of people gathered close, telling stories into the dark. Outside the wind howls, but inside there is warmth, a fragile island of humanity. To us, it seems inevitable that our species survived, because here we are, but to them, nothing was guaranteed. Survival was a coin flipped every day, and somehow, for 100,000 years, it kept landing on the side of endurance. Scientists today study this extinction vortex in animals still living. They see it in island populations of birds, in isolated herds of antelope, in endangered species of big cats. Numbers drop, inbreeding rises, chance disasters hit, and soon the spiral deepens. Most species caught in such a vortex vanish within centuries. Humanity remained inside it for over 100 millennia, a feat that seems to defy the odds. Something about our ancestors allowed them to resist the pull. Cooperation, perhaps, or mobility, or the stubborn spark of adaptability that would later define Homo sapiens. There is also a quirky element in this idea. Geneticists sometimes describe survival in small populations as like tending a fire. With almost no fuel, you carry embers and bundles of bark, shield them from wind, blow gently to keep the faintest glow alive. Too much breath and it dies, too little and it fades. That is what our ancestors did, not with literal flames alone, but with their very existence. They carried humanity forward as a bundle of embers, glowing just enough to outlast the long storm. Of course, not all scientists agree on the full picture. Some debate whether the population size truly fell as low as 1,000. Perhaps there were slightly larger groups scattered and loosely connected, separated for long stretches, but occasionally mixing. In that case, humanity's survival would have been less precarious than the strict number suggests. Others argue that the bottleneck might not have been a single global collapse, but a patchwork of regional declines. We may never resolve this fully. Fossils from the period are scarce. Genetic signals blur with time, and models leave room for interpretation. But even the most cautious voices agree. The numbers were small, dangerously small, and extinction was not a distant possibility but a daily threat. Try to feel that threat for a moment. Picture walking across a savanna stripped bare, the horizon hazy with dust. You know your group number's only a few dozen. You know another group may exist beyond the hills, but you may never meet them. You carry your child. You clutch a burning branch, and you pray the rains will return. That was the texture of life inside the vortex. It was not only the hunger of the body, but the hunger of uncertainty, the knowledge that your people were too few to fill the world. And yet, there is something deeply calming in recognizing that we are the children of survivors. Every one of those 1,280 individuals succeeded, not in the sense of wealth or conquest, but in the simplest, most profound way. They lived long enough to pass life forward. The fire kept burning because hands shielded it from the storm. When you breathe in now, you are echoing their breath. When your heart beats, it carries their rhythm. Each of us is proof that the vortex did not win. Somehow, against the mathematics of collapse, humanity found stability. Perhaps through cooperation, perhaps through sharing food, perhaps through sheer persistence. Whatever the mechanism, the result is clear. The spiral slowed, the drain did not empty, and the ember endured. As this section draws to a close, hold the image of that ember, glowing faint in the dark, carried through deserts and cold, shielded from chance and hunger. The extinction vortex did not claim us. Instead, something remarkable happened inside that crucible of small numbers, something etched not in the dust of the savanna, but in the spiral of DNA itself. For within those fragile generations, two chromosomes once joined into one, leaving a mark that still defines humanity today. And to understand it, we must step closer to the thread of our genetic fabric and look at the seam where the story of our species was stitched in a way no other creature shares. Every species carries its history not only in bones and footprints, but in the very structure of its chromosomes, the bundles of DNA that sit inside every cell, like volumes in a library. In chimpanzees and gorillas, there are 48 of these volumes, arranged in pairs, 24 pairs in total. But in humans, there are only 23 pairs. At some point in our deep past, two of those ancestral chromosomes fused together to create what we now call human chromosome number 2. The signature of this event is still visible, a scar in the fabric of our DNA. Imagine sewing two pieces of cloth into one. If you look closely at the seam, you can still see the stitches, the overlap where the fabrics were joined. In our DNA, scientists can see that seam, a stretch where telomere sequences, the repeating ends usually found at the tips of chromosomes, appear in the middle of chromosome 2, like a misplaced punctuation mark. They can also see the faint remains of two centromeres, the anchor points that normally sit at the center of a chromosome, though one has been silenced. This is not guesswork or metaphor. It is molecular evidence, as real as the seam on a garment. It tells us that long ago, in a small population of our ancestors, two chromosomes became one. Now picture the strangeness of this. In a population of thousands or millions, such a mutation might have appeared and then disappeared, lost in the shuffle of genetic diversity. But in a population reduced to just over 1,000 breeding individuals, chance plays a stronger hand. A single change can spread quickly, not because it is necessarily advantageous, but because there are so few individuals to dilute it. Within generations, the fused chromosome became a feature of everyone who survived. And so all humans today carry the legacy of that fusion. We are defined by it in a way that no chimpanzee or gorilla is. There is something quirky, almost charming, in how geneticists talk about this event. They sometimes describe chromosome 2 as a stitched-together flag, or as a book made from two smaller ones glued spine to spine. It is a reminder that our DNA is not some flawless machine, but a living manuscript, with erasures, smudges, and edits that turned out to be permanent. The fusion is like a page where the editor glued two chapters together, and every copy afterward contained the same odd seam. Yet here lies the debate, one that still sparks curiosity. Did this fusion do more than change our chromosome count? Could it have influenced the evolution of our species in more profound ways? Around the site of the fusion are genes involved in growth and development. Some researchers speculate that the fusion might have affected how our brains developed, perhaps opening the door to the expanded cognition that later defined Homo sapiens. Others are cautious, reminding us that correlation is not causation. The fusion may have been simply neutral, spreading only because the population was so small. Whether it shaped our intelligence or was simply a genetic accident remains unresolved. It is one of those mysteries where science offers evidence, but not yet a verdict. Let the thought settle for a moment. Two strands of DNA, once separate, now joined. A seam running down the spine of humanity. Every one of us carries this stitch, this evidence of our shared origin. It is not something you can see in the mirror, not something you can feel in your bones. Yet it is there, in every cell, silent and constant. It is a reminder that our species is not only the product of survival, but of chance events fixed by time. Imagine telling this story around a fire. The ancestors would not have known about chromosomes or telomeres, but they might have understood the idea of stitching, of joining two things into one. They might have looked at a patched hide cloak and nodded. Just as two pieces of skin are sewn into one garment, two parts of our past were sewn into one chromosome. They could not know the details, but the metaphor would have resonated. And perhaps, in some unspoken way, they carried the weight of that change in how their minds grew, how their children learned, how their communities adapted. There is a quiet beauty in recognizing that what makes us human is not only the grand sweep of history, but these small molecular quirks, a seam in our DNA, a scar carried by every living person, a reminder of the fragile and unusual path we took. Other animals did not fuse their chromosomes this way. Other apes kept their 48. Only we carry 46. It is like a hidden birthmark shared by an entire species. When you breathe now, when you blink or stretch, you are moving a body shaped by that fusion. Your blood cells, your neurons, your muscles, all are organized on a blueprint with 23 pairs of chromosomes, not 24. That difference is not just a number. It is identity. It is part of what makes us who we are. And yet, the debated question lingers like a shadow. Was this fusion one of the keys that unlocked our potential, or simply an accident carried by chance? Science may take decades more to answer. Perhaps we will discover that the genes near the seam shaped our brains in ways we cannot yet imagine. Perhaps we will find that the fusion meant nothing at all beyond altering the chromosome count. Either way, it is part of our inheritance, carried silently in every heartbeat. As this section draws to its end, hold the image of that seam in your mind. Picture it as a stitch across fabric, a joint in stone, a faint line running through the manuscript of life. It is delicate, almost invisible, and yet it changed us forever. And from that stitch, our story flows back into the larger fabric of survival. The bottleneck was not only numbers dwindling, not only hunger and thirst, but also a transformation of the genome itself. To see its consequences, we must look again at what was lost and what was carried forward, at the great pruning of diversity that left us more vulnerable, yet also more united. And so we step into the next chapter to ask, what did humanity lose during the bottleneck? And what did it mean for the future of our kind? When a forest is vast, its trees are many and varied. Oaks stand beside pines, maples beside birches, each different in bark, leaf, and root. If a fire sweeps through, some may perish, but others survive, and the forest returns. But when the forest is reduced to a handful of trees, every flame threatens the whole grove. The same is true of genes. Diversity is a forest of possibilities, a safeguard against disease, famine, and change. And when humanity shrank to just over 1,000 breeding individuals, our forest of diversity was cut down to a few fragile stands. Geneticists estimate that during the bottleneck, humanity lost as much as 65% of its genetic diversity. Imagine walking into a library where 2/3 of the books have been removed. Entire shelves are gone, languages silenced, stories erased. What remains is precious, but also incomplete. That is the inheritance we carry, a genome pruned by disaster, stripped of much of the variety that once existed. By comparison, a later event 60,000 years ago, when humans migrated out of Africa and colonized the globe, reduced diversity by only about 15%. The earlier bottleneck was deeper, sharper, and more lasting. It was not just a footnote in our history, but a defining wound. The consequences of that loss still echo in us today. With fewer genetic defenses, our species became more vulnerable to diseases. If a plague swept through those ancient bands, they had fewer variations to resist it. Even in the modern world, scientists believe that certain weaknesses in our immune system may trace back to this ancient thinning. We are, in some ways, more fragile because of it. And yet, paradoxically, this fragility is also a testament to resilience. For despite losing so much, we survived. We adapted with what little genetic variety remained. And from that narrow base, we built the immense diversity of cultures, languages, and histories we see today. Picture it another way. Imagine humanity as a great river. In its early days, many streams fed into it, each carrying minerals and life. Then, during the bottleneck, the river narrowed to a trickle, forced through a stone gorge. Most of the water spilled away, but a thin stream continued. On the other side of the gorge, the river widened again, but it carried less than it once had. That is us, the wide flow of humanity today, born from a stream that nearly dried up. There's a quirky detail in how scientists sometimes explain this. They compare the bottleneck to a seed bank fire. Imagine a vault where seeds from every plant are stored. If a fire destroyed most of them, only a few would remain to replant the future. That is what happened to us. The vault of our genes burned, and only a fraction of the seeds survived. From those, all humanity grew. It is sobering, and yet strangely comforting. We are all, quite literally, cousins born from the same small packet of seeds. Of course, not everyone agrees on the exact depth of this loss. Some argue that genetic diversity may have been slightly higher than the models suggest, that isolated groups may have preserved unique variations which later merged. Others suggest that while we lost much, we may also have gained certain advantages, because in small populations, harmful mutations can be purged more quickly. The balance of loss and gain is still debated. But even with such debate, the consensus remains. Humanity emerged from the bottleneck carrying far less variety than before. Think about what that means for you personally. Every feature you carry, your height, your skin, the curve of your smile, comes from that narrowed gene pool. You are shaped not just by parents and grandparents, but by the survivors of a time when the human genome was stripped down almost to its core. Every person you meet shares that same inheritance. Beneath our surface differences, we are astonishingly alike, more alike than most animals in the wild. That likeness is not an accident. It is the scar of the bottleneck, carried in blood and bone. Yet within that scar lies a kind of unity. When you look across a crowd, when you hear voices in a dozen languages, when you see faces of every shape and shade, it is easy to imagine we are vastly different. But on the genetic level, we are close, almost siblings. That closeness is not a limitation. It is a bond. It means that what divides us culturally is smaller than what unites us biologically. It means that our diversity today is a triumph of imagination and adaptation, grown from a narrow biological base. There is a calmness in recognizing this. We do not need endless variation to create endless stories. Out of a limited genome came art, religion, music, science, love, and laughter. Out of a narrowed forest came the vastness of civilization. Our ancestors may have lost many possibilities, but they held on to enough. And with that enough, They built a future none of them could have imagined. Pause for a moment and breathe with this thought. Imagine the small circle of survivors sitting around their fire, unaware that their limited genes would one day bloom into billions of lives. They may have felt fragile, and indeed they were. But fragility did not mean failure. Fragility meant care. They watched each ember closely, guarded each child fiercely, cherished each success deeply. Perhaps it was that very fragility that bound them closer, taught them the value of cooperation, and seeded the resilience that defines us still. As the night deepens in your imagination, picture the forest of humanity cut down, but not destroyed. A few trees left standing, swaying in the wind, holding their ground. From them, an entire forest regrew. That is the legacy of the bottleneck, a smaller, more vulnerable humanity, yet one strong enough to endure and to flourish. And from this recognition, our story flows onward. The loss of diversity was not the end. Something remarkable began to change in parallel. The traces and fossils grew fewer, leaving a mysterious gap in the record. But while the stones fell silent, a new force began to glow more brightly in the lives of our ancestors. Fire itself, once rare, became their constant companion. It is there, around 800,000 years ago, that humanity's numbers began to rise again, and with fire came not only warmth and safety, but the rekindling of our destiny. There are times in history when the earth speaks loudly. Bones scatter in caves, stone tools lie buried in riverbeds, ash layers preserve the outlines of footprints. And then there are times when the earth grows quiet, leaving almost nothing behind, as if history itself has taken a long breath. Between 950,000 and 650,000 years ago, we encounter such a silence. Archaeologists call it a fossil gap. The record of our ancestors grows thin, their traces scarce, as though humanity had nearly vanished into the background of the world. Walk with your imagination into this silence. Picture an archaeologist today digging through layers of earth, sifting sand, searching for the glint of a tooth or the edge of a tool. In many places there is nothing to find. Entire millennia go by in the soil with barely a whisper of human presence. It is as though the stage was set, but the actors had stepped away. This emptiness is not just absence, it is testimony. It aligns with the genetic evidence that humanity's population was reduced to a thread. Few people mean few traces. Few traces mean the earth remembers less. The silence itself becomes evidence. The feeling of this gap is uncanny. We are used to thinking of history as a continuous march. Stone tools here, settlements there, fossils scattered across every age. But in this window of time, the trail goes cold. You can stand in a cave where layers record millions of years, and in the sediment that should contain signs of humans, there is almost nothing. The fires burned too small, the populations too scattered, the deaths too few to leave behind many bones. Humanity was present but ghost-like, its footprint too faint to be pressed deeply into the stone. There is a quirky kind of metaphor that archaeologists sometimes use for this. They say the record looks like a symphony, where the orchestra suddenly falls silent, leaving only a faint hum from a single instrument. Imagine a piece of music where the drums stop, the strings pause, the horns go quiet, and only a lone flute continues, soft and trembling. That was humanity during the fossil gap, a single line of melody barely audible over the winds of time. And yet silence does not mean nothing happened. Life continued. Fires were lit. Children were born. Food was gathered. But so few people were alive that their presence rarely left marks we can see today. Think about how much of modern life would vanish if only a few thousand people existed across the whole earth. Entire centuries might pass without leaving enough evidence to be noticed a million years later. Houses would decay, bones would be scattered, tools would be lost. The same was true then. The quiet is not an absence of life, but a reflection of how precariously it was lived. Scientists debate the meaning of this gap. Some argue that the scarcity of fossils is not entirely due to small populations. Fossilization is always rare, dependent on the luck of burial and the kindness of geology. Perhaps the places where people lived during those millennia have simply not been discovered or were eroded away. Others believe the genetic signal of a bottleneck confirms that the silence is real, that the fossil gap is not just chance, but the echo of a near extinction. Both views may be partly true. We may be missing pieces of the puzzle, and yet the pieces we have tell a consistent story. Humanity nearly disappeared, and the earth kept few souvenirs of their struggle. Imagine the loneliness of those millennia. A child drawing in the dust would leave no mark 100,000 years later. A family eating around a fire would vanish without record. An elder's bones, buried shallow in dry soil, would crumble to nothing long before archaeologists could find them. All of it gone, except for the faint traces carried in our DNA. It is haunting to realize that most of the lives that brought us here are invisible to us, as if they were written in water. And still, there is comfort in this thought. Silence is not failure. The absence of fossils is not the absence of existence. Humanity was still there, breathing, laughing, surviving in small numbers. The quiet is part of our story, a reminder that most of life is lived in moments that leave no trace, moments of tenderness, of fear, of resilience. You and I carry the evidence of those quiet lives inside us. Their names may be lost, their bones scattered, but their survival pulses in our hearts. The fossil gap also invites us to wonder about what innovations may have been smoldering, unseen, during that time. If numbers were small, then ideas would have spread slowly, but perhaps seeds of change were planted in those centuries of quiet. We know that later, around 800,000 years ago, fire began to blaze more brightly in the archaeological record. It is possible that the skills of keeping fire, of using it not only for warmth but for cooking and protection, were nurtured in that long silence, carried forward by whispers and practice, waiting for the chance to expand. Picture it. A small fire deep inside a cave, guarded carefully from wind and rain. Generations passed the knowledge down: how to carry embers in bark, how to shield flame with stone, how to coax sparks from friction. Most of these fires left no ash we can find today, no charcoal that endured, but the knowledge survived, waiting for the world to open again. The fossil gap is like the dark before dawn, quiet and still, but holding the promise of light. When you think of this silence, let it be a gentle reminder. Most of life, even today, leaves no mark. The words you whisper to someone you love, the warmth of a shared meal, the comfort of sleep beneath a starry sky, these will not become fossils. And yet, They matter. They carry us forward, just as the quiet lives of those ancient people carried us through the bottleneck. As this section closes, hold the image of the fossil gap not as emptiness, but as breath. A pause in the music, a space where the melody softened. Out of that silence, a new note would soon rise, a note bright with flame. For around 800,000 years ago, the traces of fire begin to appear more often, glowing from the layers of caves and open hearths. And in that glow, humanity's numbers began to swell once again. The silence gave way to sparks, and the ember grew brighter. Close your eyes and imagine the world 800,000 years ago. The land is colder and drier than before, the forests thin, and the air carries the smell of dust. Small groups of humans cling to survival in scattered refuges, their numbers fragile, their lives uncertain. And then, in this long twilight of our history, a new light begins to appear more often in the record. It flickers at first, faint and scattered, but grows steadier with time. It is fire, no longer a rare accident of lightning, but a tool guarded, tended, and shared. Around 813 to 800,000 years ago, archaeologists begin to see more evidence of fire. Layers of charcoal in caves, burnt bones, heat-cracked stones. It is as if humanity discovered a companion that would never leave its side. The timing is striking. The genetic record shows that around this same period, the population began to rebound after more than 100,000 years of near collapse. It is tempting to draw a connection. The fire grows brighter, and so does humanity. Fire may not have been the only reason for survival, but it became a force that changed everything. With fire, nights grew safer. With fire, food grew softer and more nourishing. With fire, the cold winds of the Pleistocene could be pushed back, if only for a circle of warmth around the flames. Picture it vividly. The crackle of burning wood echoes in a cave. Sparks rise and dance like stars caught in a whirlwind. Children gather close, their faces painted orange by light, their eyes wide. Hunters return from the darkness, laying meat upon the coals, the smell of roasted flesh filling the air. The night is no longer absolute. Fire has drawn a line between light and shadow, inside and outside, safety and danger. It has turned caves into homes, and gatherings into communities. There is a quirky detail in how people of that age might have carried their fire. Without matches, without lighters, keeping a flame alive was as important as keeping a child alive. Some evidence suggests embers may have been wrapped in bark or dung, glowing softly through journeys, like small lanterns carried across the land. Imagine travelers walking for days, holding bundles of smoke, guarding them with care, blowing gently when the glow faded. The fire was alive, and it had to be fed and protected. It was not just a tool, it was part of the family. And yet, here we step into debate. Did fire truly cause the population rebound, or did it simply arrive alongside it? The correlation is strong. Fire appears more often in the record, just as the bottleneck ends. But correlation is not causation. Perhaps the climate eased slightly, opening more space for humans, and fire simply spread with the larger numbers. Or perhaps fire was the decisive factor, allowing humans to eat more efficiently, to share warmth, to keep predators at bay, and thus to thrive where before they barely survived. Some scholars lean toward the second view, seeing fire as the pivot point of human history. Others are more cautious, reminding us that the evidence is patchy, the timeline's fuzzy, the interpretation uncertain. The truth may lie somewhere in between. What cannot be denied is the symbolic weight of fire. To light a flame is to defy the night. To tend it is to create continuity across hours, across days, across generations. A spark carried by a mother becomes the fire that warms her grandchildren. Knowledge of how to coax flame from stone or wood spreads slowly, carefully, until it becomes tradition. Fire is more than survival. It is memory. It is ritual. It is the first technology that reshaped what it meant to be human. Consider how fire changed the diet. Raw roots became soft and edible. Meat became easier to chew and digest, unlocking more calories and freeing energy for other uses, perhaps even brain growth. Food once dangerous became safe. Fire did not only warm bodies, it nourished minds. Around those hearths, people gathered, faces glowing, stories beginning to take shape. Communication deepened, bonds strengthened. Fire was not just heat, it was the heart of community. And so, as humanity's numbers began to rise, the glow of fire mirrored that growth. Each new hearth was a point of light against the darkness of the Pleistocene world. Imagine the landscape at night, once black and silent, now dotted with small orange glimmers. Each glimmer a family, each family a chapter of survival. From the perspective of the stars above, it must have seemed as though the earth itself had grown freckles of fire. Pause for a moment with that image. Let yourself feel the warmth on your skin. Smell the smoke in your hair. Hear the crackle and hiss of burning wood. Imagine yourself part of that circle, looking into the flames while shadows danced on the cave walls. It is a scene that has repeated for nearly 1,000,000 years, a thread of continuity unbroken from then until now. Even tonight, somewhere on Earth, families sit by fires under the open sky, telling stories much as our ancestors once did. The connection is direct, intimate, and comforting. Fire in this way becomes a metaphor for humanity itself. Fragile yet enduring, dangerous yet protective, fleeting yet eternal. It requires attention, cooperation, and care. Left untended, it dies. Guarded and shared, it thrives. Our species has always been bound to it, not only for survival, but for identity. When you look at a candle flame or a campfire, you are looking at the same force that carried us out of the bottleneck, the same ally that walked beside us as we rebuilt our numbers. As this section draws to a close, remember the timeline. For more than 100,000 years, humanity teetered on the edge of extinction. Then, as the bottleneck lifted, fire began to blaze steadily in our lives. Whether cause or companion, it marked the turning of an age. The silence of the fossil gap gave way to the crackle of flames, and in that warmth, humanity began to grow again. Hold this image, embers glowing red in the night, guarded by hands roughened from work, glowing like hearts that refuse to stop beating. From those embers rose the bonfire of humanity's future. And so, with fire as our guide, we move forward into the story of recovery, the river of humanity surging again after being squeezed to a trickle, breaking free from the gorge of extinction into the open plains of possibility. Imagine a river pressed tight between canyon walls. For miles it narrows, churning against stone, its current forced into a thin line. Then, Suddenly, the walls fall away. The water surges, spreading wide and fast, a torrent released into open ground. This is the image scientists use when they describe what happened to humanity after the long bottleneck. For more than 100,000 years, our population was squeezed to a thread. And then, around 800,000 years ago, the thread unraveled. The numbers began to climb. The river widened. Life, once held in check, burst forward. The genetic evidence shows it clearly. After centuries of fragile survival, humanity's effective population size began to rise again, climbing steadily. Where once there were only about 1,000 breeding individuals, there were now thousands, then tens of thousands. The recovery was not instant, but compared to the long stagnation of the bottleneck, it felt like a flood. Humanity was no longer whispering in the dark. It was speaking in a stronger voice. Picture what this meant on the ground. Villages did not yet exist, but family bands grew larger. Clans met more often. Encounters between groups became more frequent. Instead of one fire glowing faintly in the distance, now there were many. The land, once nearly silent, began to echo with more footsteps, more laughter, more cries of children. For the first time in over 100 millennia, humanity was no longer shrinking. It was growing. Archaeological signs support this story. Stone tools from this period become more widespread, appearing in greater numbers across Africa and parts of Eurasia. Fire sites grow more common, evidence that knowledge of flame was spreading, not fading. Bones of animals show cut marks and burns, signs of organized hunting and cooking. The fossil record, quiet during the gap, begins to speak again, softly at first, then louder. Humanity was leaving traces once more, filling the earth with signs of its persistence. There is something quirky in how researchers sometimes describe this rebound. They liken it to a champagne bottle shaken for centuries, cork pressed tight, until finally the pressure forces it open and the contents spill out. The bottleneck was the cork, holding humanity to a trickle. When it lifted, the population expanded with a rush, not chaotic, but steady and unstoppable. From the perspective of deep time, the change is dramatic. On charts of genetic diversity, the line shoots upward, climbing like a river, breaking free of stone. And yet, as with all things in science, there is debate about why the rebound happened when it did. Some argue that the increasing mastery of fire provided the turning point. Safer nights, better diets, more resilient communities. Others point to subtle changes in climate, a shift towards slightly more favorable conditions, where rainfall returned in certain regions, creating habitats that could support larger numbers. Still others suggest that cultural innovations, perhaps new methods of hunting or new kinds of tools, gave humans an edge. The truth may lie in a combination of these forces, fire, climate, and ingenuity, all converging to open the path forward. Whatever the cause, the result was profound. Humanity, once a scattered handful, began to spread again. Imagine standing on a high ridge and looking down across a valley. A century ago, you might have seen no smoke rising. Now, here and there, faint columns curl into the sky. Each column a fire, each fire a family, each family a branch of the growing tree. Slowly, carefully, the earth began to fill again with human presence. The recovery was not without risk. Numbers were still small by modern standards. A few thousand people scattered across continents can vanish quickly. But compared to the bottleneck, The difference was night and day. The extinction vortex loosened its grip. The spiral slowed, and the river of humanity began to carve a broader course. Our ancestors were still fragile, but they were no longer clinging to the edge of disappearance. There is comfort in imagining the feeling of that time. More voices around the fire, more hands to share the work, more children playing at the edge of the camp. For generations accustomed to scarcity and silence, the growth must have felt like hope itself. To see your people not only surviving but multiplying is to feel that the future has returned. That sense of momentum, of renewal, must have been a powerful force, binding groups together, urging them forward. Think also of how this rebound shaped our path. With larger numbers came more opportunities for exchange. Ideas could travel further, skills could spread faster. If one group discovered a better way to shape stone, another could learn it. If one group discovered how to carry embers more safely, the knowledge could ripple outward. Culture, still fragile, became more resilient as more people carried it. The fire of humanity was no longer a single flame, but a constellation. Even so, scientists caution that the rebound was not infinite. Populations grew, but they remained vulnerable for many millennia. The Earth still swung through long glacial cycles. Droughts returned, ice advanced, habitats shifted, but humanity was no longer trapped in silence. It was building momentum, preparing for the branching paths that would soon lead to Neanderthals, Denisovans, and eventually us. The rebound was not the end of struggle, but it was the end of the darkest night. Pause here, and let the metaphor of the river rest in your mind. Imagine the water pressing through the gorge, breaking free, spreading wide across the land. Hear the roar of it, steady and deep, filling the silence with sound. That roar is humanity, recovering, gaining strength, carving its place once more in the story of life. As this section closes, hold the image of the river breaking free, of fires spreading across valleys, of voices multiplying against the backdrop of the Pleistocene world. The bottleneck was over, the silence lifting, the ember swelling into flame. And from this surge came new possibilities, new branches in the tree of humanity, lines that would diverge and meet again, shaping the destiny of our species. The river, once pressed to a trickle, was about to split into channels, flowing in different directions across the world. From this point, the story of humanity would no longer be one line, but three. And so we turn now to that branching, to the emergence of Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, and to the strange, intimate dance that bound them together. Picture again the river of humanity, newly freed from the narrow gorge of the bottleneck. Its waters spread wide across the land, stronger and louder than before. But like any river, it does not flow forever in a single channel. Sooner or later, it divides. Around 700,000 to 600,000 years ago, that is what began to happen to humanity. One ancestral population, once barely surviving, started to branch into separate lineages. From that branching would come three great families of humankind: Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. The evidence of this divergence lives both in fossils and in DNA. Bones from Europe and Western Asia show forms gradually shifting toward what we would later call Neanderthals: broad skulls, heavy brows, powerful bodies built for cold climates. Fossils from Africa reveal traits that point toward our own lineage: slimmer builds, subtler brows, early hints of the features that would later define Homo sapiens. And then, hidden until recently, DNA from caves in Siberia and Tibet revealed another lineage, the Denisovans, cousins of Neanderthals, who occupied parts of Asia. Three flames from one fire, glowing in different corners of the old world. Imagine this moment not as a sudden split, like a clean cut, but as a slow divergence, like paths winding apart in a forest. For tens of thousands of years, the differences were subtle. People on opposite ends of the range could still meet, still exchange genes, still recognize one another as kin. But slowly, step by step, the distinctions grew. Tools were shaped differently. Bodies adapted to different climates. Languages, though now lost, may have begun to diverge into sounds unfamiliar to distant cousins. The unity of one people gave way to the plurality of three. There is a quirky image scientists sometimes use to explain this. They describe it as one campfire breaking into three smaller fires. At first, the flames are close, their light overlapping. You can walk between them easily. But as the fires are moved further apart, their circles of light no longer touch. Each becomes its own center of warmth, its own gathering place. That is what happened to humanity. From one campfire, three hearths emerged. And yet the precise timing and geography of this branching remain debated. Some researchers argue that the split between Neanderthals and Denisovans happened first, around 600,000 years ago, from a population that had moved north out of Africa. Homo sapiens, they suggest, remained behind in Africa, continuing to evolve until we too became distinct. Others argue that the process was more complex, with populations separating and reuniting multiple times, exchanging genes before diverging again. The truth may be less a neat branching tree and more a braided river, with channels that divide, merge, and divide again. Consider how strange this is. For most of our history, we were not alone. The idea that humanity once meant only Homo sapiens is a modern illusion. For hundreds of thousands of years, there were other humans, close enough to interbreed, close enough to laugh and cry and tell stories, yet different enough to be distinct. When you think of Neanderthals and Denisovans, do not picture beasts or strangers. Picture cousins living in parallel, carrying their own versions of fire, their own memories, their own dreams. The fossil record shows Neanderthals spreading across Europe and Western Asia, their bodies sturdy against the cold, their tools sophisticated. Denisovans, less well known, left few bones but left their signature in our DNA, especially among people of Asia and Oceania. Homo sapiens, still forming, remained rooted in Africa, shaped by its shifting landscapes of savanna and desert, forest, and coast. Three experiments in humanity, unfolding at the same time, connected by deep ancestry but destined for different paths. Let the scene unfold in your imagination. In Europe, a Neanderthal clan huddles in a cave, their fire blazing against the cold winds. In Asia, Denisovans move across mountains, breathing thin air, leaving faint traces of their presence in a few teeth and fragments of bone. In Africa, ancestors of Homo sapiens sharpened tools beside a river, their eyes reflecting the same curiosity that would one day carry their descendants across oceans. Three fires, three lives, all burning in the same era, all unaware that their stories would one day be woven into one. The debated question of where and when this divergence happened may never be resolved completely. The fossil record is patchy. DNA survives only in rare conditions, and human populations have always moved and mingled. What matters is the recognition that our species is not the only chapter in humanity's book. We are one of several, and the others are not footnotes, but full stories of their own. To honor them is to honor ourselves, because their lives touched ours in ways still visible in our genes. Think about that for a moment. If you carry ancestry from outside Africa, you likely have a trace of Neanderthal DNA. If your ancestry is from certain parts of Asia or Oceania, you may also carry Denisovan DNA. Their lives live on in us, whispers in our cells, reminders that humanity was once plural. The branching of our lineage did not end with separation. It set the stage for encounters, for exchanges of love and rivalry, for a tangled family tree. As the firelight of this section dims, hold the image of those three hearths glowing across the world. Each fire a version of humanity, each path a possibility. We were never destined to be alone. We grew among cousins, learned from them, exchanged with them, and in time, replaced them. But that story of meetings and minglings, of competition and kinship, belongs to the chapters ahead. For now, remember the branching itself, the river splitting into channels, the campfire dividing into three. The bottleneck had ended, the silence had lifted, and humanity was no longer one thread but several. From this moment onward, our story would always be a story of many, entwined in ways both tender and tragic. When three fires burn on the same landscape, sooner or later, their circles of light overlap. The same was true for humanity after the Great Branching. Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans in parts of Asia, and early Homo sapiens in Africa and beyond. Though separated by distance, their paths were not sealed. Over time, they met again. And when they met, they did not only compete, they also mingled. The story of humanity is not a clean divergence, but a tapestry woven with threads of reunion, crossings that left lasting marks in our very genes. Genetic evidence has revealed what fossils alone could not. When scientists first sequenced Neanderthal DNA in the early 21st century, they found something astonishing. Non-African humans today carry between 1 and 2% of Neanderthal DNA. It was proof that our ancestors did not just fight or avoid Neanderthals. They loved them, bore children with them, and carried their legacy forward. Later discoveries showed the same with Denisovans. Populations in Asia and Oceania today carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA. The ghosts of these encounters still walk beside us, written into our chromosomes. Imagine the scenes behind those numbers. Two groups meet at the edge of a forest or on the banks of a river. At first wary, they circle one another. But curiosity wins. A meal is shared. Words or gestures cross the gap. Bonds form. Children are born. Their features blend traits of both lineages, their bodies living proof of connection. These children grow. They carry firelight forward, and their descendants live among us still. The encounters were likely rare, scattered across centuries, but they were enough to leave a permanent signature. There is a quirky detail in how scientists sometimes describe this. They call us a species with ghosts, because inside every cell are fragments of DNA from cousins who no longer walk the earth. Your immune system, your skin, even the way your body handles oxygen at high altitudes may carry traces of Neanderthals or Denisovans. In Tibet, for example, A gene inherited from Denisovans helps people thrive in thin mountain air. In Europe and Asia, certain Neanderthal genes influence how our bodies respond to pathogens. We are quite literally mosaics of past humans, carrying echoes of fires that burned out long ago. And yet, not all the encounters were tender. Competition must have been fierce. Groups meeting in the wild may have fought over hunting grounds, water sources, or safe shelters. Fossil injuries suggest violent clashes were not uncommon. Some meetings may have ended in death rather than union. The balance of rivalry and kinship, of hostility and intimacy, is impossible to know fully. But the genetic record insists that love, however fleeting, was part of the story too. Debate continues about how frequent these crossings were, and whether they were welcomed or coerced. Were Neanderthal and Denisovan genes integrated gradually through generations of contact, or were they rare sparks in otherwise tense relationships? The evidence cannot tell us everything. It gives us fragments, like burned pages of a book. But even fragments matter. They prove that our species did not evolve in isolation. We are the children of many meetings, some joyful, some harsh, all woven into one tapestry. Think about what this means for your own life. If your ancestry lies outside Africa, you likely carry Neanderthal DNA. If it lies in parts of Asia or Oceania, you may carry Denisovan DNA as well. These aren't abstract statistics, they are personal. Every breath you take, every blink of your eye, is accompanied by the faint rhythm of cousins whose fires died out 30,000 years ago. They are gone, but not gone. They live in us, shadows stitched into our cells. There is something haunting, but also comforting in that realization. When you look into a mirror, you are not seeing only Homo sapiens. You are seeing the mingling of lineages, the persistence of love and survival across hundreds of thousands of years. Your face is a living fossil, your body a time capsule of ancient encounters. The world today, filled with billions of humans, still carries the quiet whispers of those three fires that once burned separately. Pause with that image. Picture three circles of firelight, distant but visible. Over time, people drift between them. Some bring stories, some bring tools, some bring children. Slowly, the circles overlap, and though one fire will eventually outlast the others, none of them vanish without leaving their warmth behind. That is humanity, not a single line, but a web of crossings, a dance of divergence and reunion. Of course, some scientists still debate the scale of these crossings. A minority argue that the percentages of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA in the U.S. today might be the result of a few rare events rather than long periods of interbreeding. Others believe there were multiple waves of contact spread across thousands of years in different regions. The truth likely falls somewhere in between. But either way, the encounters shaped us permanently. Without them, we would not be who we are. Think of a song composed from many voices. One voice may dominate the melody, but faint harmonies enrich the sound. That is us. Homo sapiens carries the main tune, but Neanderthals and Denisovans hum beneath it, subtle yet enduring. The song of humanity is not solo, but chorus. As this section comes to a close, hold the thought that you are never alone in your lineage. Behind you stand not only Homo sapiens, but the cousins who shared this world. Their genes are woven into your immune system, your bones, your breath. Their lives flow into yours like rivers merging into the sea. And from this merging rises the next chapter, competition. For even as Homo sapiens mingled with Neanderthals and Denisovans, it also competed with them for survival. The fires overlapped, but only one would burn into the future. To understand why it was us, we must look at the differences in flexibility, in culture, in the ways our ancestors adapted to a shifting Earth. When cousins live side by side, sharing valleys, rivers, and hunting grounds, closeness brings not only kinship, but competition. For tens of thousands of years, Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans walked the same Earth. They were not separate in time, like chapters in a book, but overlapping verses in a poem. They saw the same skies, breathed the same winds, and often sought the same prey. And yet, only one lineage survived into the present. The question is why. Neanderthals were powerful, their bodies shaped for the cold landscapes of Ice Age Europe. Shorter and stockier than Homo sapiens, they were built to conserve heat, with muscles that could rival modern athletes. Their tools were sophisticated, carefully crafted stone flakes and points, sometimes hafted onto spears. They could hunt large animals, stand against predators, and survive brutal winters. Denisovans, though less visible in the fossil record, seem to have thrived in Asia, even in high mountains where oxygen is thin. Their DNA still helps modern Tibetans breathe at altitudes that would leave others gasping. These cousins were not weak or primitive. They were adapted, specialized, strong. And yet, there is power not only in strength but in flexibility. Homo sapiens, though physically more slender, carried an advantage in adaptability. Our ancestors were generalists. They could eat a wider range of foods, from fish and shellfish to roots, grains, and game. They could thrive in deserts, forests, coasts, and plains. Where Neanderthals were tied tightly to certain environments, sapiens could shift, improvise, and survive in many. This flexibility became the quiet force that tipped the scales. Imagine three groups meeting on a plain, where game has grown scarce. Neanderthals, skilled hunters, seek the great beasts they rely on. Denisovans, adapted to their high ranges, find the lowlands less forgiving. Homo sapiens, less dependent on one strategy, begin gathering plants, fishing rivers, and building networks of exchange with neighboring groups. The Neanderthals and Denisovans endure when conditions match their strengths. But when the climate shifts, when animals move, when forests burn, they struggle. Homo sapiens bend where others break. There's a quirky detail in this story. Archaeologists have found evidence that Homo sapiens developed sewing needles earlier than their cousins. A small thing, perhaps, but with needles came fitted clothing, better shelter from the cold, and the ability to expand into harsher regions. Neanderthals wore hides too, but often draped loosely without stitching. Sapiens, with their sewn garments, could step further into the cold, expand further into new territories. Sometimes survival turns on details as small as a sharpened bone with a hole in its tip. Debate continues over exactly why Homo sapiens eventually outlasted the others. Was it clothing? Was it social networks, larger and more cooperative than those of Neanderthals? Was it language, more complex and flexible, allowing for better planning and teaching? Or was it sheer chance, a few strokes of fortune that turned into history? The truth may be a blend of all these factors. What is clear is that Homo sapiens had an edge in adaptability. They were not stronger, but they were more versatile. Not always braver, but often better at changing course when needed. Think of adaptability as water. Stone is strong, rigid, unyielding. But water flows around obstacles, reshapes itself, and in time carves valleys deeper than stone itself. Neanderthals and Denisovans were stone, solid, powerful, perfectly matched to their niches. Homo sapiens were water, flowing, shifting, enduring. Over millennia, it was the water that lasted. Picture the encounters this way. In Europe, a Neanderthal clan and a Homo sapiens clan meet at the edge of a forest. For a time, they share the space. They may exchange, even intermarry. But as seasons grow harsher, the sapiens try new foods, new tools, new strategies, while the Neanderthals stay tied to what had always worked before. In Asia, Denisovans endure in their mountains. But as climates fluctuate and resources grow thin, Homo sapiens spread into their ranges, carrying flexible diets, portable shelters, and social bonds that span wider distances. The result is not immediate extinction, but a gradual shift. Generation by generation, the balance tilts. Still, let us not imagine Neanderthals and Denisovans as failures. For hundreds of thousands of years, they thrived in environments that would have crushed others. Neanderthals survived in cold that would freeze modern humans in days. Denisovans adapted to altitudes where lungs strained for air. They were extraordinary in their own right, masters of their chosen worlds. But when the Earth shifted too quickly, when climate swung with violent rhythms, their specialization became limitation. Homo sapiens, less perfect in any single niche but more able to adjust across many, carried the day. And even as sapiens spread, they carried fragments of their cousins with them. Their DNA lives in us, reminders that competition was never pure erasure. The Neanderthal brow, the Denisovan breath at altitude, lingers still. Extinction of the lineages did not mean extinction of their legacy. Humanity today is not a single fire replacing others, but a flame that carries sparks of all three. As you breathe with this thought, feel the calm weight of it. The victory of Homo sapiens was not one of cruelty alone, nor of superiority in every sense. It was the victory of flexibility, of imagination, of the ability to change course when the earth demanded it. It is a lesson that still matters. Survival favors not always the strongest, but the most adaptable. And so, as this section fades, hold the image of three fires burning together, two steady and strong, one flickering and restless. The steady flames were powerful, but bound to their places. The restless flame danced, shifted, moved, and in time spread until it filled the horizon. That restless flame was us. From here, the story turns not only to survival, but to flourishing. Homo sapiens, growing in number, spreading across continents, began to weave networks of culture, cooperation, and imagination that reached far beyond survival. To understand why this mattered, we must look closely at the unique qualities of our species, the bonds of cooperation, the hunger for learning, the creativity of the mind that transformed survival into civilization. They were masters of their places long before our kind learned to read the wind in as many tongues. Picture Neanderthals in Ice Age Europe, bodies thick with muscle, chests broad like living furnaces, moving through spruce forests where snow swallowed sound. Their tools fit their winters the way a glove fits a hand. Hafted points, heavy scrapers, edges tuned to take down great beasts, and dress hides in biting cold. In caves, smoke climbed low ceilings, while steady hands mended gear by ember light. Outside, the night could cleanse a careless soul, but they were not careless. They knew every shadow of their valleys, every crossing in the river ice, every rut where mammoths favored to pass. Far to the east, imagine Denisovans, shouldering thin mountain air with the calm of those born to it. Ridges fell away like waves turned to stone. Breath left plumes in morning blue. Whatever faces they wore, their legacy is plain in people who now live close to the sky, a borrowed trick in the blood that keeps oxygen moving where others tire. In forests below, they would have walked the old paths, stepping through larch and birch with the patience of hunters who measure time in seasons, not hours. These cousins were not failed experiments. They were exquisite solutions to precise problems. Cold that split rock, altitudes that starve lungs, winters that asked questions few could answer. Their genius was specialization, the deep knowing of a single world, while our genius would become the art of changing worlds. Set side by side, the contrast is gentle but decisive. Stone that holds and water that flows. Both are beautiful. Only one follows the river when it leaps its banks. There is a quirky detail that illustrates this difference. Archaeologists have found shells and ochre pigments used by Homo sapiens as early as 100,000 years ago, perhaps for decoration, perhaps for symbols. To paint a body or decorate a tool is not just practicality, it is imagination, an awareness of identity, of meaning beyond survival. Neanderthals, too, left hints of symbolic behavior, but the evidence is sparser. For sapiens, such behaviors became common, woven into daily life. A decorated shell or painted mark may seem small, but it signals a mind thinking beyond the immediate. A mind able to imagine possibilities not yet present. Debate continues among scientists about exactly how different sapiens were from their cousins. Some argue that Neanderthals may have had language as complex as ours, but that their smaller population sizes limited the spread of innovation. Others suggest that while their intelligence was high, their social structures were more fragmented, preventing the wide networks that made sapiens so resilient. Still others believe the difference was less about raw intelligence and more about adaptability, the willingness to try new things, to take risks, to experiment. Whatever the exact reasons, the outcome was clear. Sapiens built networks that allowed them to thrive where others faltered. Think of it as the difference between a single fire and a network of fires connected across the land. One fire, however strong, can be extinguished by storm or accident, but a web of fires, spread across valleys, can survive any single blow. If one goes out, others remain. Knowledge, like fire, was carried from group to group, ensuring that no innovation was lost, no lesson wasted. This resilience of sharing became the bedrock of our survival. Consider how this may have felt in daily life. A sapiens child could grow up learning not only from parents, but from elders, cousins, and friends. Songs carried memory of migrations, marks on stones remembered hunting grounds, gestures taught skills without words. The entire community became a library, storing knowledge too vast for one person alone. In this way, Homo sapiens turned fragility into strength. Small groups alone might falter, but connected together, they endured. There is comfort in recognizing that this cooperation was not only practical, but emotional. Laughter around fires, comfort in grief, the joy of shared food. These built bonds stronger than stone. To survive, our ancestors did not only sharpen blades, they sharpened trust. They practiced empathy. They learned to see themselves in one another, and that recognition carried them further than muscle or bone could. Of course, the debate remains alive. Some researchers caution that we may underestimate Neanderthals, that their intelligence and cooperation may have been closer to ours than once believed. New discoveries often reveal sophistication in their behavior, care for injured individuals, use of pigments, possible symbolic marks. Perhaps the gap between them and us was smaller than we think. Yet even with this caution, the pattern remains. Homo sapiens grew more numerous, spread wider, adapted faster. Whatever the margin of difference, it was enough to tip the balance of history. Pause here and imagine that balance. On one side, powerful bodies, honed by ice and cold, masters of hunting. On the other, flexible minds, weaving bonds across landscapes, sharing stories and tools. In the long run, it was not brute force that carried the day, but imagination and connection. That lesson hums quietly beneath our history. Survival belongs to those who learn, who cooperate, who dare to imagine what does not yet exist. Hold the image of those fires connected across valleys, their smoke rising into the sky like threads weaving one vast fabric. That fabric is humanity itself, stitched not only from genes, but from stories, from trust, from the willingness to share. It is the inheritance that allowed Homo sapiens to outlast their cousins and eventually fill the earth. And so, as this section closes, remember the quiet truth. We are here not because we were the strongest, but because we were the most connected. Our strength was in each other, in the web of bonds that turned scarcity into survival. From this foundation, the rise of Homo sapiens truly begins, spreading further and faster than any human lineage before. Ahead lies the story of how these bonds, this imagination, and this resilience allowed sapiens to expand across continents, carrying with them not only fire and tools, but the seeds of everything we now call civilization. Imagine the Earth as a vast, unsettled canvas during the later Pleistocene. Glaciers stretched across the north, deserts spread in the tropics, forests shifted like tides with the changing climate. Into this restless world stepped Homo sapiens, armed not with greater strength than their cousins, nor with sharper teeth or claws, but with adaptability. From their roots in Africa, they began to move outward, crossing deserts, coasts, and mountains, leaving behind not just footprints in the soil, but ripples in the fabric of life. Their expansion was not a sudden march, but a long, steady tide, cresting and retreating with the rhythms of climate, yet always pushing forward. What made this possible was not only their bodies, but their minds. Neanderthals were specialists in the cold of Europe. Denisovans were adapted to high Asian plateaus, but sapiens carried within them the flexibility to thrive in many worlds at once. Along coasts, they learned to harvest shellfish and fish, using tides as larders. In savannas, they tracked herds across great distances, guided by memory and cooperation. In forests, they learned which plants could heal and which could harm. In every landscape, they experimented, adapted, and found a way. Picture them standing at the edge of a new territory, the horizon unfamiliar, the air carrying scents of unknown plants and animals. Where another species might hesitate, sapiens stepped forward. They tested new foods, built shelters from unfamiliar materials, crafted tools suited to new prey. Theirs was not reckless wandering, but cautious exploration, guided by the same imagination that once painted shells and carved marks in stone. There is a quirky detail in the story of their spread. Evidence suggests that sapiens along coasts may have carried embers from fire in shells or hollowed bones, keeping the flame alive as they walked. A tiny portable hearth, glowing red, carried like a talisman against the dark. This practice would have allowed them to settle new places without waiting for lightning to strike. Wherever they went, the fire went with them. It is almost poetic to imagine humanity's expansion, not just as the movement of people, but as the spreading of firelight, one ember at a time. Debate remains about when and how these movements unfolded. Some models suggest early waves of sapiens may have left Africa as early as 200,000 years ago, though many of those early migrations may have faltered. The more successful expansions began around 70,000 years ago, when sapiens spread widely into Eurasia, encountering Neanderthals and Denisovans along the way. But even earlier, in smaller steps, they were already exploring, already testing the limits of their adaptability. The timeline is still refined with every fossil and every genetic study, but the theme is consistent. Homo sapiens spread further and faster than any human lineage before. What gave them this advantage? Some point to their diets, more varied, less dependent on a single prey species. Others highlight their tools, increasingly complex and specialized, from blades to fishing hooks to tailored clothing. Still others emphasize social networks, the ability to rely on alliances across distances, creating safety nets in a dangerous world. Perhaps it was all of these combined, a package of flexibility, creativity, and cooperation that together allowed sapiens to do what no other human group had done, to make the entire world their home. Imagine the sensory reality of this expansion. Along a coast, the smell of salt water, the crunch of shells underfoot, the shimmer of fish scales in torchlight. In a savanna, the sound of hooves rumbling like thunder, the taste of roasted marrow cracked from bones. In forests, the damp scent of moss, the calls of unseen birds echoing in the canopy. Each environment demanded new skills, and each was met with curiosity rather than despair. The world was a series of challenges, and sapiens approached each as a puzzle to be solved. This curiosity may have been their greatest gift. Where another group might turn back from a difficult landscape, sapiens asked, "What if? What if we try this route? What if we build a raft? What if we follow the herd beyond the horizon?" Each question carried risks, but also rewards. Over time, those questions carried them across rivers, mountains, and eventually seas. They did not know where each path would lead, but they were willing to step into the unknown. And yet, scientists debate whether it was purely internal traits that drove this spread, or whether external pressures, climate swings, dwindling resources, pushed them outward. Perhaps it was not only curiosity, but necessity. When droughts struck Africa, people were forced to move. When ice sheets retreated, new lands opened, and sapiens filled them. Expansion may have been as much about survival as about ambition. The line between need and exploration blurs in deep history, and perhaps it always does. There is comfort in recognizing the duality here. Humanity's rise was not the story of conquest alone, but of persistence. Each step outward was both a risk and a hope. Each fire lit in a new land was both survival and vision. To imagine those moments is to feel the quiet courage of our ancestors. Picture a small band standing at the mouth of a cave, looking out over a valley no one they know has ever seen. The wind carries strange scents. Shadows move among unfamiliar trees. The elders hesitate, but the younger ones step forward, torches in hand, children following close. Behind them, the fire burns in the cave. Ahead of them, the world waits. That is the spirit that carried sapiens across continents. And so the expansion of Homo sapiens was not only about where they went, but about what they became. Each new land shaped them. Each new challenge honed them. The world itself became their teacher, and they learned quickly, adapting not just in body, but in mind and culture. Out of this came the resilience that ensured their survival long after Neanderthals and Denisovans faded. As this section closes, hold the image of humanity as a tide, flowing outward from its source, filling valleys, coasts, and mountains with firelight. It was not the loud crash of a wave, but the steady rise of water, inevitable and enduring. The tide of Homo sapiens could not be turned back. And yet, even as it spread, it carried the memory of fragility, the bottleneck, the silence, the near extinction. That memory shaped their choices, binding them closer, teaching them to value the bonds that held them together. From here, our story turns to what these bonds meant, not only for survival, but for identity. For cooperation, imagination, and adaptability were not only tools, they became the essence of what it means to be human. And in the story of that essence, Thasipine, we find the key to why Homo sapiens endured while others did not. When Homo sapiens spread outward, the world itself became both a gift and a challenge. Each new land offered food, shelter, and possibility, but each also demanded change. We gained skills, knowledge, and stories with every step. We learned to hunt in forests, to fish in rivers, to cross deserts, to survive winters that would once have seemed impossible. Expansion made us stronger, more resilient, more varied in culture and tradition. But it also carried shadows. In leaving behind the bottleneck, we did not leave behind the marks it carved into us. We remained a species shaped by fragility, carrying both strengths and weaknesses that still echo in our lives today. Consider what was gained first. From small bands scattered across Africa, we became networks of people spread across continents. Our diets broadened, our tools multiplied, our shelters grew more sophisticated. Cooperation deepened as survival demanded planning and sharing. Families became clans, clans became tribes, and bonds extended beyond blood to alliances of choice. With greater numbers came security. If one group faltered, others could provide support. With greater diversity of environment came resilience. If one food source failed, another could be found. Humanity had learned not only to endure, but to thrive. There is a quirky detail in how expansion fostered creativity. Archaeologists note that as Homo sapiens spread, their tools began to vary more widely. A stone blade from Africa might look different from one in Europe or Asia, reflecting local adaptations. This variety is a sign of imagination at work. Instead of copying the same design everywhere, humans experimented, shaped tools to new circumstances, and in doing so, left behind a patchwork of ingenuity. It is almost as if the earth itself inspired innovation, each landscape offering new puzzles and new solutions. But alongside gains came losses. The genetic bottleneck had already stripped much of our diversity. Even as our numbers grew, The gene pool remained narrow compared to other species. This left us vulnerable in ways we could not see. Certain diseases spread more easily. Certain weaknesses remained unshielded. Some researchers suggest that our susceptibility to epidemics even today is partly rooted in that ancient loss. A broader genetic forest might have given us more defenses, more resilience against illness. Instead, we walk the world with fewer tools in that hidden arsenal. Debate continues about how much this matters. Some scientists argue that the narrow base of our genome made us weaker against certain challenges, but also stronger in others. Harmful mutations may have been purged more quickly in the small population, reducing genetic burdens. Others suggest that our narrow genetic roots may help explain our unusual social cohesion. When you are more alike, it may be easier to empathize, to see yourself in others, to cooperate across distances. Perhaps the bottleneck made us both vulnerable and united, fragile yet bonded. Think about that unity for a moment. You and I and every person alive descend from the same small group of survivors. No matter your language, your culture, your home, your ancestors sat around the same few fires nearly 1,000,000 years ago. They endured the same droughts, carried the same embers, whispered the same hopes into the night. All the differences we see today, skin tones, faces, traditions, nations, are variations on a single, narrow theme. Beneath the surface, we are remarkably alike, more alike than almost any other species on Earth. Pause with that thought. Let it settle like warmth in your chest. In a world often divided by borders and beliefs, there is something calming in remembering that we are, quite literally, family. We share not only history, but blood. Our conflicts are quarrels among cousins, our differences threads of color woven through the same cloth. To recognize this is to find humility and perhaps even comfort. The debated consequences of our shared ancestry extend beyond biology into culture. Some anthropologists argue that the very sense of cooperation and empathy that defines us may be tied to our fragile past. When survival depended on small groups clinging together, trust and care became essential traits. Over generations, these traits may have been reinforced, not only culturally, but biologically. Others caution that this is speculation, that empathy may arise from many sources, but the idea remains compelling, that the very tenderness we feel for one another, the ability to comfort, to laugh, to share, is rooted in the necessity of survival through the bottleneck. There is comfort in imagining this inheritance. When you reach out to help someone, when you laugh in company, when you share food or song, you are echoing the choices of ancestors who did the same, not out of luxury, but out of need. They survived because they cared for one another. We thrive today because we carry that same impulse. And yet, fragility still lingers. Epidemics remind us of our vulnerabilities. Climate change tests our adaptability. Division strains our bonds. The lessons of the bottleneck remain relevant. Survival belongs to those who adapt, who cooperate, who imagine beyond the present moment. Our past whispers to us still, urging unity against challenges too vast for anyone alone. Picture again the great expansion. Fires spread across valleys and coasts, voices filled forests and plains, tools multiplied, songs began to echo. Humanity grew, and with growth came strength. But beneath it all lay the memory of silence, the knowledge of how close we had come to vanishing. That memory is both wound and gift. a reminder of fragility and a source of unity. As this section closes, hold the image of humanity as a great tree with a narrow trunk. Its roots are few, its base thin, but from that narrow stem has risen a canopy that now covers the earth. Every branch, every leaf, every fruit is connected, nourished by the same core. That is us. One tree, one family, many faces, one root. From here, our story bends toward reflection. The bottleneck and its aftermath were not only about survival in the past, they shaped who we are today. To see this clearly, we must explore how our strengths and weaknesses, our cooperation, our creativity, our fragility, remain with us still, shaping our struggles in the modern age. Here in 2025, the ember our ancestors carried is ours to tend. The same traits that once kept 1,000 souls alive, adaptability, cooperation, imagination, remain the tools we must lift against today's storms. The story of the bottleneck is not only about what happened 900,000 years ago. It is about who we are now. The traits that carried us through near extinction still echo in our lives, guiding us as we face challenges that look different but feel familiar. Droughts and cold winds no longer press us in the same way, but we face new storms, pandemics, shifting climates, and the weight of billions of lives upon a fragile earth. To understand ourselves in this moment, we must remember what the bottleneck taught us: adaptability, cooperation, and imagination. Adaptability remains our quiet strength. In ancient times, it meant shifting diets, moving to new lands, trying unfamiliar foods, crafting new tools. Today, it means changing technologies, adjusting economies, and rethinking how we live in a warming world. The spirit is the same. When conditions shift, we are tested not by our strength, but by our ability to change. Just as our ancestors bent where others broke, so too must we bend when the earth demands it. Cooperation, too, is a legacy of the bottleneck. Small groups survived only by sharing food, caring for children, and protecting one another. Alone, they would have failed. Together, they endured. Today, cooperation takes the form of nations sharing knowledge, communities supporting each other, families holding together in crisis. The lesson is unchanged. Survival belongs not to the solitary, but to the connected. The fires we light now are not only in hearths, but in networks of information, in hands reaching across borders, in the bonds that remind us we are stronger together. Imagination is perhaps our most remarkable inheritance. Around ancient fires, it meant stories, songs, and symbols, ways of seeing the world beyond the immediate. Imagination gave meaning to survival, hope in hardship, vision beyond hunger. Today, imagination drives science, art, and dreams of futures not yet built. It is imagination that allows us to see beyond problems, to create solutions where none seem possible, to envision paths forward when the present feels dark. There is a quirky example of how this ancient inheritance lingers in small ways. Some researchers note that humans remain unusually curious compared to other primates, often tinkering, experimenting, trying new things even when they are not necessary. A child stacking stones, a scientist building models, an artist sketching on paper, all echo the same impulse. It is the same spark that once led someone to try cooking food over fire for the first time, or to carve a tool in a new way. That restless creativity may feel playful, but it is survival written deep into our species. And yet, there are shadows too. Our narrowed genetic base left us vulnerable to disease. Epidemics remind us of that fragility. Viruses spread quickly through a species so alike, with fewer defenses to slow their march. Some scientists believe that pandemics of the modern age echo the vulnerabilities planted in us during the bottleneck. Others argue that our interconnected world, not our genetics, is the greater danger, that our closeness now is cultural rather than biological. The truth may be both, fragility in our genes and fragility in our networks. Pause and reflect on this. Our unity, born of ancient survival, is both our strength and our risk. What makes us alike helps us cooperate, but it also makes us collectively vulnerable. We are a family that cannot easily escape its own ties. In times of crisis, we feel this keenly. It is both gift and burden, like the seam in our chromosome, a reminder that chance shaped us as much as choice. The legacy of the bottleneck also touches how we see each other. Our shared ancestry means our differences are recent, layered on a deep foundation of similarity. And yet we often forget this. We divide by nation, race, belief, forgetting that beneath these layers we are nearly indistinguishable. Remembering the bottleneck can restore perspective. We are all the children of the same fragile fire. All of us descend from the same 1,000 souls who once clung to life in the shadows of drought and ice. To harm one another is to harm family. To help one another is to honor our shared origin. There is debate among scholars about how much our ancient past should influence how we see our present. Some argue that evolution explains too little of modern society, that culture and history have shaped us more profoundly. Others say the opposite, that the bottleneck still defines us, that our instincts for cooperation, our vulnerabilities, our very unity, all flow from that crucible. Perhaps both are true. We are culture layered upon biology, stories layered upon scars. Neither can be ignored. Imagine the resonance of this story. In the ancient world, survival meant listening to the wind, watching the stars, tracking animals across plains. Today, survival means reading data, watching climate models, tracking changes across the globe. Different tools, different languages, but the same essence, paying attention, adapting, and acting together. The continuity is humbling. We are not so far from those who huddled around the first fires. Picture them now, their faces glowing in the light, whispering words we will never know. They survived by bending, by sharing, by dreaming. Their legacy is not just in our DNA, but in the way we still gather, still tell stories, still imagine tomorrow. The bottleneck was not only a trial, it was a teacher. It showed us what we must carry forward: flexibility, empathy, and vision. Without those, we would not be here. Without them now, we cannot move forward. As this section closes, let the thought linger like embers at the end of a long night. Humanity's past is not distant. It burns quietly in us still, shaping every choice, every connection, every dream. And just as the bottleneck once ended, opening into a time of growth, so too can we find renewal today if we remember its lessons. From here, our story turns toward reflection on the meaning of unity itself. The bottleneck left us more alike than any other primates. That likeness is a scar, but also a gift. To see its full weight, we must linger on the truth that all of us, billions of souls, are one family, born of a single fragile fire. When we look at the long thread of our history, it is tempting to divide it into pieces: Africa, Europe, Asia, Neanderthals, Denisovans, Sapiens. But beneath all of these divisions lies one truth that cannot be undone. We are one family. Every face you see in the world carries the same narrow inheritance, born from the same small group who survived a near ending almost 1,000,000 years ago. Our diversity is real and beautiful, but it is a blossom on a single stem, a canopy grown from a single root. To remember this is to see the world differently, not as fragments in conflict, but as cousins bound by time. Think of what it means that only 1,280 breeding humans once carried the future of the species. Every war we wage, every border we draw, every argument we inflame happens inside one family tree. When you pass a stranger on the street, you are passing a cousin, however distant. The divisions we see now, race, nation, belief, are younger than the memory of drought and ice that shaped us. In the long view, we are still sitting together around a fire, faces glowing from the same flame. There is a quirky detail that scientists sometimes point out. Humans are more genetically alike than most chimpanzee populations living a few miles apart. That means two chimpanzees from neighboring forests may be more different from each other than you are from someone across the globe. This closeness is unusual in the animal kingdom. It is the scar of the bottleneck, but it is also the mark of our unity. In a sense, we are all siblings, separated not by deep divides, but by the thin brushstrokes of history. Debate continues about how best to use this knowledge. Some argue it should remind us of empathy, that unity is our natural condition, and division a cultural invention. Others warn that unity does not erase real cultural differences, that history and tradition matter too. Both are true. We are united in biology, varied in culture. The key is not to erase difference, but to hold it in balance, to celebrate variety while remembering the deep root beneath it. Pause here and picture humanity as a single fire, its flames splitting into many tongues. Each tongue flickers differently, casts its own light, carries its own beauty, but they are all part of the same blaze. That is us, many but one. The unity does not erase individuality. It gives it meaning. What does this unity ask of us today? Perhaps it asks humility, the recognition that no one stands apart from the whole. Perhaps it asks compassion, the awareness that to harm another is to harm kin. Perhaps it asks vision, the imagination to see that our greatest challenges, climate change, disease, conflict, are too vast for fragments to solve. They demand family effort, billions of cousins working together, as once small clans worked together to survive drought and cold. There is comfort in imagining the bottleneck as a kind of rehearsal for the present. Then, a few hundred families held the weight of the species in their hands. Now billions of us hold the weight of the planet. The scale is larger, but the lesson is the same. Survival depends on cooperation, adaptability, and imagination. We are still in the same story, only on a different page. And perhaps, just as the survivors of the bottleneck carried fire across deserts and forests, we are called to carry new fires, fires of knowledge, of compassion, of vision, into the future. The ember is the same, the responsibility the same. Guard it, feed it, pass it on. As you listen, take a moment to reflect on what surprised you most in this story. Was it the sheer fragility that humanity almost ended before it began? Was it the curious seam of chromosome 2 stitched into our DNA? Was it the silence of the fossil gap or the glow of fire marking recovery? Each detail is a thread, and together they weave the fabric of who we are. Here is where I invite you gently to join in the circle. If you found a moment that stayed with you, share it. If a part of the story touched you, whether the droughts, the fires, the branching of our family tree, let it linger not only in your thoughts, but in your words. Add your voice to the chorus, as our ancestors once added theirs around the fire. And if you wish to continue with these journeys into deep time, into the quiet corners of history, know that you are welcome here. Rest with us in these stories. Return when you seek calm, and if you would like, leave behind the hour you are listening from, so the circle may stretch across time zones, as it once stretched across valleys and continents. The call to action here is not a command, but an invitation to remember, to share, to reflect. Just as the Bottleneck survivors carried flame carefully through the night, so too can we carry the flame of story, knowledge, and connection together. As this section closes, hold the image of the human family as one circle of firelight, billions of faces, but one flame. From the brink of extinction to the fullness of today, we are proof of endurance, proof of unity, proof of the strength of fragile embers carried forward. And now, as the story begins to soften into its final rhythm, we prepare for the gentle wind down. The last chapter will not speak of struggle, but of rest, of the calm that follows endurance, of the way history itself can lull us into sleep. The story of humanity's near extinction is a story of silence, of survival, and of renewal. Yet, as the fire of history dims into embers, let us slow our steps and walk softly into the quiet where the tale becomes not urgency, but comfort. Imagine the last scene not as a battle or a discovery, but as a night long ago when our ancestors, weary from hunger and travel, sat inside a cave. The walls glowed faintly with the shimmer of firelight, the stone ceiling low above their heads, the night outside vast and cold. Within, children drifted to sleep beside the warmth of the embers, their breathing steady, their dreams unrecorded but carried into the future. That moment, repeated countless times across millennia, is the true heartbeat of our species. Close your eyes to the winds of the Pleistocene. Hear them sweeping across dry plains, carrying the dust of vanished rivers. Feel the air cooling as the sun sets, a vast sky deepening to indigo. One by one, stars bloom above, countless points of light scattered like sparks across a cosmic hearth. Beneath that sky, the fire in the cave glows low, fragile but enduring. It is the same fire that carried us through the bottleneck, the same ember that guarded our fragile continuity for more than 100,000 years. It is the image to hold now, humanity as an ember in darkness, glowing softly, vulnerable, yet unextinguished. In those long nights when the bottleneck pressed tight, survival meant patience, quietness, and care. A mother sang softly to her child. A father watched the flames. An elder told a story that drifted into the air and was lost, but its rhythm lingered. Every gesture mattered. Every bond was precious. And though their numbers were few, the tenderness of those nights was enough. It was in the whispers, in the lullabies, in the shared silence that the future was born. Think of the motif of footsteps. In the dust outside the cave, faint prints marked where they had walked, toward water, toward shelter, toward tomorrow. Most of those prints vanished in wind and rain, but a few impressions remained, pressed into mud that hardened into stone. Some of these faint traces, preserved for hundreds of thousands of years, remind us that even the smallest step can echo across eternity. The footsteps of our ancestors, fragile as they were, became the path that led to us. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, imagine your own footsteps fading softly into dust, part of a long line of journeys that connect past to present. There is a calmness in seeing history not as a rush of events, but as a long exhale. The bottleneck, the fire, the branching of lineages, the resilience of Homo sapiens, all of it becomes one continuous breath, drawn in by those who came before, released by those who carry the story now. The exhale is gentle, unbroken, stretching across centuries, carrying us into the quiet of this very night. Debates remain, of course, about the depth of the bottleneck, the role of chromosome fusion, the causes of recovery. But debates are like ripples on water. Beneath them lies stillness, a calm truth that does not change. We are here, and we are one. The details shift, the interpretations flicker, but the ember of continuity remains. That ember is the gift we carry, a light glowing in the chest of every living person. Picture yourself now as part of that ember. You are not separate from the fire of humanity, but woven into it. Your breath one among billions. Your heartbeat echoing rhythms set long ago. Outside, the world is wide and filled with storms. But here, within the circle of story, the fire glows steady, casting warmth, inviting rest. The night does not ask for striving now, only for surrender, only for the peace of closing your eyes and letting time drift around you like a gentle tide. Imagine the cave one last time. The embers glow red, shadows dance faintly on stone. Outside, the moon rises, pale and steady. Inside, voices fade to whispers, then to silence. The people sleep close to one another, the warmth of their bodies shared, their dreams carrying them through the darkness. Above them, stars wheel in the sky, silent witnesses to their endurance. It is a scene both fragile and eternal, and it is the cradle from which we all descend. As you listen, let the rhythm of their breathing merge with your own. Slow, steady, gentle. Let the weight of history soften into calm. The droughts, the struggles, the debates, all fade now into background hush, leaving only the image of firelight, footsteps, and stars. This is the place where history becomes lullaby, where the past itself cradles you toward rest. Hold the motif of fire as you drift. It begins as spark, grows to flame, softens to ember, fades to glow. Just so, wakefulness becomes drowsiness. Drowsiness becomes sleep. The ember of humanity glows still, in you, in me, in all of us. It does not demand attention now. It asks only that you rest, that you trust its glow will endure until morning. And so, with slow words and gentle cadence, let me offer this closing thought. We are the children of survivors. We are the family of a single fragile fire, carried across deserts and ice, guarded in caves, whispered through songs and stories. Whatever divides us now, we are united by that ember. It burns still, not in the past, not in the stars, but in us. May that ember warm you tonight. May it remind you of continuity, of unity, of peace. May your sleep be deep, your dreams gentle, your rest unbroken. As the fire dims, as the footsteps fade, as the stars wheel silently overhead, know that you are safe in the story, safe in the circle of light, safe in the long embrace of humanity's endurance. Good night, and sleep well.